From space command to supermarket aisles, from immigration control to legacy debate, this week in the United States politics was not business as usual. And under the watchful eyes of President Trump, it's clear that politics as usual is no longer on the table. Well, when loyalty becomes the qualification and when wellness becomes a war, when celebrity is no longer a visa, and when legacy becomes living history. What we are witnessing is not chaos, but a recalibration. And in that recalibration, the question returns again and again. Is this turbulence, or is this just what it feels like when a country wakes up? Well, welcome. I am Star Smart, and this is the Flash News. Well, a swift decision from the White House today sent ripples across Washington's elite corridors and the Silicon Valley's orbiting egos. President Donald Trump has formally withdrawn the nomination of tech billionaire and private spaceflight magnate Jared Isaacman as a prospective head of NASA, a role that once was seen as his to lose. The reason, not technical competence, not innovation, but allegiance. The official statement cited a thorough review of prior associates, but insiders point to what they describe as Isaacman's past support for Democratic fundraising efforts. Some even linked to candidates who have openly opposed the Trump's administration, America First, in space directives. Now the questions resound. How do you launch America's next frontier with someone who once funded the political forces that tried to drag it backwards? Well, Isaacman, once heralded for his inspiration for mission with a SpaceX and hailed as the symbol of private-public space collaboration, finds himself now earthbound politically and symbolically. And the Trump White House is unapologetic. It says we are charting a new course militarily, economically, and interstellarly. A senior official told Flash News off camera that journey new must be led by loyalists, not legacy billionaires. And while critics call the move petty or paranoid, others ask a sharper question: if we are building the most powerful space command in human history, shouldn't it be helmed by someone whose loyalty is as high as their altitude? Well, good question there. Still in the United States, politics we see making America healthy again. In a sweeping announcement that has ignited both praise and controversy, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has unveiled a national wellness initiative, Make America Healthy Again. It is bold and it is sweeping and is already rattling the cages of big food and big pharma. Ultra-processed foods, seed oils, pesticides, even fluoride. They are no longer just fringe topics whispered by wellness influencers and renegade nutritionists. Under Kennedy's leadership, they are becoming matters of federal concern. Now, we are being poisoned slowly in our own land, says Kennedy during a fiery press conference in the mornings, and it's not foreign enemies doing it. It is our own addiction to fake food and toxic policy. The initiative pledges new research, labeling, regulations, and possible bans on certain chemical additives, long approved by the FDA, but now linked to metabolic disorders and neurotoxicity. And of course, the backlash was instant. Critics say Kennedy's campaign is steeped in pseudoscience and stroke conspiracy theories. But the administration isn't backing down. In fact, President Trump praised Kennedy's courage, saying the plan fights for the soul and strength of America's children. And that leaves one to wonder, in a country where obesity is rising, cancer diagnoses are younger, and autoimmune disorders are everywhere, is it time to stop laughing at alarm bells and start asking why they are ringing so loud? Well, that aside, over to the News from the weekend with the Grupo firm grounded, fans of Mexican's regional music were left disappointed as the widely popular band Grupo firm announced it was canceling its headline performance at a California music festival. The reason wasn't stage fright, but a stern message from Washington. The United States government suspended the band's visas, citing irregularities and potential violations of immigration terms. The move comes amid a renewed emphasis on equal enforcement of visa regulations under President Trump's tightened immigration framework. And while social media quickly lit up with outrage and conspiracy theories, the message from the White House was as clear as it was unapologetic. No one is above the law, not even crowd-pleasing celebrities. Music, they say, knows no borders, but immigration laws, they very much do. And in a nation still healing from the wounds of lax enforcement, porous boundaries, and selective justice, we wonder if the rules don't apply to the famous, and why should they apply to anyone? Well, Congress makes the case for Trump legacy in stone and silver. They said it couldn't be done. It was premature, that it was even illegal. But now Capitol Hill is humming with the sound of history being rewritten, or at least drafted into legislation. Members of Congress have introduced a pair of proposals seeking to immortalize President Trump in two of the most iconic ways possible: adding his likeness to Mount Rushmore and placing his face on a new $250 bill. Critics, of course, scoff. Legal scholars cite the 1866 law prohibiting living individuals from appearing on the United States currency. And of course, Mount Rushmore's sacred stone is protected by centuries of tradition. Itself is being made in real time. And Trump, they insist, isn't just a former president or current president, but is the defining American political figure of the 21st century, architect of an ideological revolution, disruptor of a stagnant elite, builder of walls, of peace accords, of economic revival, and now they argue, Trump supporters are arguing, a legacy worthy of granite and ink. They say we don't carve men into mountains because they were popular. One congressman said, we do it because they changed the terrain of the country itself. Now, what has Trump really done? Love him or loathe him, the landscape has shifted. The ground has cracked open on the conversation of his name being written in the sands of time, and particularly on America's currency. But then in the echoes of all this thunder, supporters ask if Lincoln and Roosevelt earned their place. Hasn't Trump earned at least a conversation? I don't think critics would agree to that. But then we'll move away from the United States politics over to the war around the world, starting with Gaza. What began as a day of hope in Rafah, Gaza, sadly ended as a stain of Greek once again. Now at least 31 Palestinians are dead following chaos near an aid distribution site operated by the United States-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The cause? That depends on who you ask. The Palestinian Ministry of Health claims Israeli military fire was to blame, citing eyewitness reports and initial hospital records. The Israel Defense Forces swiftly denied the allegations, labeling it another false narrative, asserting their troops were not in the vicinity at the time of the ordeal. Caught in the crossfire of blame is the GHF itself, which released carefully edited footages claiming no incidents occurred at our site. The footage, while widely shared, has not yet been independently verified, and so like much in Gaza, troops too lies buried under the rubble. But this tragedy is far from isolated. It is part of a much darker tide. The World Food Programme confirms that over 77 aid trucks were overrun and looted by desperate civilians this week alone, painting a vivid image of a society unraveling under the weight of famine. Over 500,000 people are now facing catastrophic levels of hunger. That's not a crisis. That is engineered collapse. And amid this, the world argues over video frames and legal definitions while children die with swollen stomachs and empty bowels. So we ask, in a war of narratives, who feeds the truth? And when will Gaza become more than just a battlefield for both missiles and media? Well, terror still walks amongst us with a bolder attack. And this happened in the heartland. A peaceful rally in Boulder, Colorado, gathered in solidarity with Israeli hostages, turned to horror when Mohammed Sabri Soliman, a 45-year-old Egyptian national, unleashed fire, Molotov cocktails, a makeshift flamethrower. 8 people got injured in the incident, and one of them an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor. The assailant reportedly shouted, "Free Palestine," during the rampage. It wasn't overseas. It wasn't in a war zone. It was in the U.S. soil, on the U.S. soil, and it was committed by a man illegally in the country. Having overstayed his visa, a detail that reignites the nation's fiercest debate. How much openness can a border afford before it becomes a wound? The FBI is investigating it as an act of terrorism, though officials are cautious about labels. But to the victims, does it matter what it is called? To the millions watching, doesn't it feel like they're letting ideology smuggle itself into the United States homes? And so again, the United States is forced to ask, is the true threat at the border or already inside the living room of the United States? While still on the war around the world, we see North Korea's naval failure, with a giant sinking in silence. A grand show of military might turn into global embarrassment for Pyongyang this week as a 5,000-ton destroyer, Kim Jong-un's pride of the sea, capsized during launch at the Chongjin shipyard. Now, the ship, hailed as a symbol of North Korea's growing naval supremacy, tipped sideways within minutes of its christening. Present at the site, Kim Jong-un himself, who repeatedly stormed away in fury, later condemning this incident as a criminal act of unforgivable incompetence. And in typical regime fashion, scapegoats followed. The chief engineer and several officers who were detained immediately. Behind closed doors, rumors swirled of possible purges within the defense sector. But the symbolism only cuts deeper than steel and rivets. A regime obsessed with optics just watched its greatest weapon sink, not in battle, but in birth. And now the question isn't just about structural failure. It is about systemic rot, and if we are witnessing a misfire or the slow unspooling of a dictatorship's myth of perfection. Well, we cannot answer that for sure. But then we still see in Ukraine, as there is another strike Operation Spider's Web, where Russia feels it this time. In a high-stakes escalation, we see Ukraine launching its 117 drones in a single coordinated strike, targeting 5 Russian air bases deep within enemy territory. The result? It is up to 40 aircraft damaged or destroyed, including strategic bombers, a direct blow to Russia's long-range capability. Moscow is reeling, Kyiv is exultant, and the rest of the world watching a new chapter of warfare unfold. One where drones outpace tanks and chip innovation outflanks billion-dollar defenses. The operation, dubbed Spider's Web, was months in planning, executed with chilling accuracy. Now, this wasn't a stunt. It was a statement. No base is too far, no sky is too safe. And for Russia's military planners, it poses a new dread. What happens when the front line becomes everywhere? And when war evolves, what stays human? Well, from the dust of Gaza to the fire in Boulder, from a capsized destroyer to a sky full of drones, war has left the battlefield. It lives now in aid trucks, in visa offices, in launch bays and power grids. And the truth, it's no longer who has the biggest bomb, but who understands the battlefield better. And first, the world is not drifting into chaos. It is sprinting into a new kind of war, ideological, digital, irregular. And we, the watchers, the voters, the civilians, have to ask, when even mercy convoys become targets, and then our own towns become front lines, where does the battlefield end, and where does silence really begin? Before we leave the flash news this afternoon, we'll take a look at France. Celebrations turning into chaos in France. It was supposed to be a night of jubilation, the Champions League final, a moment when Europe's elite clubs clash for glory and the winning city becomes the epicenter of joy. But in France, joy gave way to something else entirely: rage, disorder, and a haunting reminder that the city of light can go dark in seconds. As Real Madrid lifted yet another trophy, the streets of Paris, Marseille, and other major French cities became scenes of unrest. Rioters clashed with police, storefronts were looted, vehicles torched, sirens echoed louder than cheers. And by dawn, the numbers were undeniable: 500 and more arrests, 192 injured, 2 dead in what authorities call unrelated incidents, but citizens call predictable consequences. Now, even with riot police deployed in full force, they couldn't contain the wave, not from ultras, not from opportunists, not from a nation that's been simmering for months under the weight of economic discontent, immigration tensions, and distrust in institutions. Because this wasn't just about football. It seems not to be anymore. We saw the script before: yellow vest, pensions, riots, police protests. Now it's been rebranded under a different night, a different pretext, but the same conclusion. France is struggling to control its own fires. And what is worse, the 2024 Paris Olympics loom just weeks away. The international spotlight is about to shine brighter than ever. But what will it reveal? A city prepared to host the world, or a powder keg waiting for one wrong spark? Tourists may come from the Eiffel and for the Eiffel Tower, but live with memories of barricades and broken glasses, which is sad. Athletes may arrive with dreams of medals, but compete beneath helicopter rotors and riots shield. So the real question isn't whether France can throw a spectacular event, it is whether it can guarantee safety, manage optics, and suppress a growing truth. If football celebrations can spiral into street warfare, what happens when the world's largest sporting event lands in a nation already cracking at the seams? Because last weekend wasn't just about a match. It was a stress test for the Republic. And the warning flares are already up. The medals haven't even been minted. And the world's already asking, is Paris truly ready to host the globe, or just to implode in front of the globe? Well, with that, we've come to the end of today's Flash News. We'll leave you with ABC Amba TV images, and coming on top of the hour, 8 p.m. is Undaunted. Do stay tuned to get informed. I remain Star Smart.